It is 2:07. We're going to call this meeting to order. Shauna, you want to do the mention of the FOIA?
Good afternoon, everyone. In compliance with the Freedom of Information Act, notice of meetings and agendas were posted and furnished to all news media and persons requesting notification. Moving on, do we have any public comments? None seen.
Okay. Approval of the minutes.
Approval of the minutes?
I move to approve them as submitted.
Need a second?
Second.
I can recognize Irene Tyson. It says member Irene Tyson?
I didn't either, but
Did I not meet
I
everybody
thought
on
that
this
was just
council?
me.
Page is
Member
that on?
She's
First page.
if
Attendance.
you can hear me.
Okay.
Irene is our sub-consultant for engagement.
Oh,
Oh, thanks, Jess.
so she shouldn't be listed as,
Yeah. So we need to strike her.
yeah.
And my last name is actually spelled incorrectly, so it's Cheney.
I'll move to accept the minutes as amended.
Okay. Well, it's accepted, so moved. We have a vote. Any other changes or corrections?
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Moving along, Mr. Davis, do you want to provide a staff update?
Staff update is pretty similar to last week. We're still continuing to work on community engagement. A lot of community engagement going on. We're trying to get out to the different types of communities. So we've grouped together the beach communities versus the rural communities versus the urban communities, et cetera, et cetera. And goodness, there was one other thing. Sorry. Obviously, you all are aware that council last night voted to reserve $20 million of the remaining ARPA money for housing. So we will be spending a lot of our time pulling together some recommendations for that $20 million. So that will end up taking up the bulk of our time as it relates to housing.
And, I was at council last night. I think the one clear message that was sent from many of the council members is the need for the plan to come together and for us to put something forward. So we had already kind of discussed and mapped out the next several months and meetings, but the need for us to deliver this plan is now more than ever, not only on our discussion for later today, but how that ARPA money is going to be spent, how the department formalizes those decisions. So the coming months, there will be a lot of conversation as we turn our attention to the plan independently, but that is good news. We'll just roll with it and continue to work on what we're doing. The presentation we received last week, this is going to dictate a lot of our discussion today, but I wanted Justin and Miriam, if you could just kind of give us a quick update on any work that you've done since we met on the 8th and any notes or thoughts about the presentation from our last session.
Yes, absolutely. I apologize. My computer might be giving you all some feedback, so I'll try and keep my comments short and hand it over to Miriam here. But we, I think what we're going to walk through just a brief presentation, I think, that really outlines the memo that we've forwarded on. And I think as we thought about the presentation we gave when we were with all of you and kind of what the conversation could be, the recommendation from this steering committee to council, and kind of what's the message now, also knowing that we've got a series of, more meetings with you all, more process to get this plan done, and more work to do. Really just sort of hone in on a specific message with the data, the need, and the information that we know now, and then sort of point at it. So we took that longer presentation from you all, crafted it into a brief memo, and Miriam's going to share some slides really to just kind of walk through that memo very quickly. A lot of it, all of it is information that you all have seen, but just packaged in a very streamlined way to mirror the memo. And I think with that, Miriam, we'll just, if you have anything to add, and then we can jump into the presentation.
Yeah, nothing specific to add. I'll just go ahead and share my screen here. And yeah, like Justin said, really very quickly walk through. Not sure that's the right screen. One moment. All right, great. Yeah, very quickly walk through some of the key concepts that are communicated in that memo. So, one quick update or sort of point of reminder is on the overall schedule for this Housing Our Future planning process, the housing planning process. At the last meeting, we had discussed kind of working to finalize the strategic framework very quickly so it could be provided at the end of this month. But I think, based on the conversation at the last committee meeting and conversations following, we shifted to a more sort of moderated and deliberate approach here so we can use the next several meetings to have more discussion and feedback and arrive at a strategic framework ready to share with council in August, rather than immediately at the end of this month. Though, as you'll see in the memo, kind of the emerging concepts within the framework and how we will collectively be working together to prioritize those elements are communicated in that memo. But then working toward a draft plan in early October and finalizing that plan in December. So here, just some very quick review of the analysis that we've shared. So our conclusions about projected housing demand over the coming 10 years is this range of 29,000 to 36,000 units. And of course, with a distribution across the affordability spectrum, with really housing units needed at every level of the economic spectrum. Then you'll see in the memo how that's communicated, sort of percentages below 80% AMI and this 80 to 120% range and above. Something I'll note really quickly is that we are very aware of how things are changing in the interest rate environment and are kind of in the process of unpacking those impacts on demand. And as things settle, we plan to revise this to reflect current considerations. However, I don't think the distribution of demand at each income level is likely to change very much. What might change is the relative demand for owner and renter occupied housing. We did some very high level, right, a real order of magnitude estimates of, if that is the demand, and if we know that there are development gaps to produce housing at various affordability levels, what does that mean in terms of the resources that are needed to actually meet this need over the coming decade? So making some assumptions at $40,000 per unit average gap assistance, leveraging all existing programs, we're talking about a very bare minimum of $450 million over the next 10 years to close that gap for housing affordable at 80% of area median income and below. and also a gap in this workforce or 80 to 120% of area median income range. As the memo describes, some of these gaps could be closed through zoning supports and things like density bonuses, but not all, and not all particularly for these more affordable units, right? Another important caveat here is that, we know that existing federal and state and local programs that county resources could leverage are very limited. They are not abundantly available at the level needed to meet this need. And what that means is really just reinforcing that this is a very bare minimum estimate. As a quick review or reminders about some of the trends we're seeing in the market, the drivers, and what that means in terms of the challenges and opportunities ahead. So, very rapid and really long-standing increases in home values in the county at rates that significantly exceed the rate of income growth. On the rent side, very rapid increases, particularly in the last couple of years. And we see this continuing, very rapid rent inflation. But even before that, highly volatile context of COVID-19, we see that the median renter really was never able to afford the average rent in the county. So, this gap is consistent, and in the last couple of years has only widened. Something we tried to unpack a little bit in that memo is, an understanding of, there are these short-run considerations and complexities that are impacting this picture. Inflation, supply and material supply shortages associated with COVID-19 and these interest rate changes that I mentioned. But, if you remember at our first presentation of all of the data and analysis, we really did talk about, all of these much longer run systemic drivers of the challenge. So, just a mismatch fundamentally between the supply and demand in the market. Very rapid economic growth, creation of new jobs, changing demographics, and in particular changing kind of income distributions, migration from high cost communities, inventory shortages, and just an undersupply in certain parts of the spectrum driving costs up. Very limited land and infrastructure, rising construction costs, and I'll note here these trends were very prevalent even before COVID-19. Construction costs had escalated quite a bit, and it is simply impossible to create some of the housing that we know is needed at those lower affordability levels without some form of support. And then, of course, just the sort of ongoing context of economic and racial inequalities and disparities that play into all of these challenges. But we also, talked with you all about, real significant opportunities for the county to work on the issue and make a significant impact. And we've identified just a few here that I'll walk through. And we know, having talked with you all, that there are more. But the first I'll highlight is the Low Country Rapid Transit line, and just how kind of timely and time sensitive an opportunity that creates, both to create more needed housing that is diverse in its price points, to foster mixed income communities, which we know is kind of a value, something we've heard from a lot of people that we've spoken with, but also so much of the county's stock of dedicated affordable housing is actually already within these station areas. So preserving some of those in a targeted way is a real opportunity. Vacant land, particularly vacant land that is publicly owned, we know is a major opportunity, and the county has ownership of quite a lot, including some number of acres actually within that Low Country Rapid Transit line, half mile at a buffer distance. The existing supply of dedicated affordable housing units and supports, kind of two pieces of this. One is ensuring that they remain affordable and at a high standard of quality as affordability restrictions expire. And the other piece is ensuring that housing choice vouchers, when households receive them, come off that years-long waiting list and receive the voucher, that they can successfully use it in a community of their choice. And we also talked about the low-income housing tax credit program, and that the current rate of production, or I should say the current rate of credits awarded to projects in the county over the last decade has been about 50 units a year, really just one project a year. And that there is, we believe, a real potential for projects in the county to receive a larger share of those statewide allocations if there are kind of other pieces of the puzzle put in place. And the memo mentions a few. Some of it is resources that help get more projects over the finish line, but also things like zoning and kind of other things that the county, but also local governments can do to make projects more competitive. Vacant land in unincorporated areas, there's a lot of it, a lot of vacant residential land where the county's zoning powers will come into play. And at our last meeting, there was a question, how much of this vacant land is actually served or within the current policy framework of the urban growth boundary, how much of that land could be and is served by infrastructure. And it's about 12,000 of those acres of vacant residential unincorporated land are within the urban growth boundary. So again, just a large share of the opportunity for the county's zoning to have an important impact. And this is, the conversation we started to have last time, the conversation that we will continue to have over the coming months with you all. What are the strategic goals? What are the values that should shape kind of strategies on the table? Reducing barriers just across the board to adding needed supply, creation and preservation of attainable housing, household stability and security, focus especially on home ownership and equity and that opportunity, and expanding capacity of the local housing ecosystem to, be partners in making all of these other important things happen. And then one of the final pieces of that memo is sort of outlining, a framework for how to prioritize the many, many different possible strategies. And this here is kind of the anticipated process in the meetings ahead with you all of kind of working this out and getting to a very detailed action-oriented plan. So, at the next meeting, continue discussion of that strategic framework and have some of those prioritization discussions. The following meeting, finalizing that framework and discussing, if there is a successful referendum, how could those funds be apportioned across these different activities? The following meeting, really continuing to detail these priority strategies and talk about implementation considerations. And then in September, especially September, but possibly also early October, having an opportunity to put these ideas, these findings, and these opportunities in front of the community, community members in community workshops, kind of charrette style things where we just really have an opportunity to hear their feedback and incorporate that feedback into the draft plan and finalize it by the end of the year. So that is just the quick recap we want to provide today, and also answer any questions that anybody might have.
Thank you. But before we go around the dais, since you just left that timeline, do you think the meeting schedule, because we're going to drop back to our regular schedule of one meeting a month for the next however long, is that an appropriate amount of time for the amount of material that we need to process, or does this group need to consider an additional meeting throughout the summer. Can you kind of elaborate a little bit on that and what the expectation and need is from the committee?
Yeah, I think the first answer, Josh, is yes, that's, I think 1 meeting a month is going to be adequate, especially if if we are more diligent about sharing things via email and if that's acceptable and we can certainly process and get feedback from you all via email through, in their intervening times between meetings. But I think once a month should be able to carry us, right on through those November refinements of the plan. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. I want to open it up to the group. Do we have any further questions or discussion about the presentation and the information that's been provided? Ms. Jackson?
Yes, thank you. Thanks a lot for working while we weren't. I do feel like you heard us at the last meeting, and I mean, I don't know what Josh heard. I didn't watch the county council last night, so I didn't hear them speak to the award of the $20 million in terms of what their expectation is for a plan. But I think if we're being, pressed or encouraged to deliver something a little more meaty ahead of their vote, which I'm assuming is still July 12th, right? To put the referendum on the ballot. I think that the summary that you just went through is very appropriate for what we are teeing up to the council, explaining that we've done the research, we've done the due diligence, we understand the various strategies, and we know that there are a lot of tools, and that we will continue to work on this. But if they want to know in more detail than just, I also like the housing needs assessment memo. I think that you make that short, but also very compelling in terms of picking out the things that, if you're a responsible elected official, I would hope that they would rise to that sense of need. But either one of these, I think, would be answering the unstated concerns that we were talking about last time, that, we can't just ask them to, in blind faith, that we're going to have something that they can stand on at the time of the referendum vote. So thank you very much. I don't have any improvements to what you've put in front of us today.
Any other questions or comments? Okay. Well, appreciate it, Justin and Miriam. We'll continue to move on. Mr. Davis, did you have handouts?
For the bond and millage discussion.
Yes, sir. Okay. So they are going to provide us with some direction from the county, but also some proposed language to kind of help guide our discussion. I would like to go ahead and preface this next conversation with that we are only making recommendations on certain particular items. We are not actually crafting or suggesting the language. Legal will take care of that. We just put this together to kind of help us guide this piece of the discussion. But I just wanted to make sure that expectation was clear.
Do we have to like it?
Say what? Do we have to like it? Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
As soon as I get my copy back, I'll start walking.
Yes, sir.
I gave her mine by accident.
Mr. Davis is going to start this discussion, so we will wait for him to get this initiated.
Actually, hey, one of Christine too, please. Oh, you already gave one. All right. So what we have here is we had the budget team put together some information on what some of this would look like. So the first sheet, which is the millage breakdown and the bond information, and I won't read it I won't read it word for word, but the top of the page talks about what it would mean for per $100,000 of assessed value, and then what 2 mills versus 3 mills would look like in a owner-occupied unit versus a rental unit. And that is one of staff's concerns, is that a large portion of the referendum money, as it is currently structured, will fall to renters because of the way property taxes are rented here. And it appears that the staff recommendation is leaning towards being towards the 2 mills versus the 3 mills, partially for that reason. Ultimately, budget is going to have a say in that based upon, the millage cap and all that sort of stuff. So just didn't want you guys to be surprised if the staff recommendation comes out different than the committee's recommendation. But that is also it's a big concern over how property taxes are structured in South Carolina. One of the other issues that we've been talking about is we've been looking around the country, and I'm not going to get too much into detail because we don't have all of the comparisons yet. Obviously, I have the jurisdictions that I have personally worked in. None of them use millage to fund affordable housing. They use either the stamp tax, or DC has a tourism tax, the hotel tax and that sort of thing. And the concept being that those who are doing well and use the city's services and drive up the prices, help to pay for, the cost of affordable housing. And, while where we are in the process probably doesn't make that feasible right now, I think our long-term recommendation will be that the county look at a different structure for funding affordable housing than the millage rate. I think it would probably be counterproductive to try to open that can of worms at this time, but that will be in the plan. It will discuss that. I think it was in the Board of Realtors, the study that the Board of Realtors had commissioned talked about that. So we certainly want to make sure that stays on the table for the long term. When it comes to the bond information, it gets a little bit more complex. Well, first of all, the second page here is just a breakdown of what individual families would pay based on the 2 mil versus 3 mills based on assumed values. Now, obviously, rental crosses the spectrum. You've got, affordable rentals. You've got, high-end $6,000 a month rentals. So obviously, we're not trying to say that the burden's going to be the same on everybody, but just to give you an idea of what different valuations mean in terms of the actual cost to the household. So that's just for your purview. Going back to the bond information, now I'll try to break this down a little bit, but here's your supplement. The 5-pager is going to break down what I'm about to say. For 2 mills, the bonding capacity appears to be around $150 million total. I won't get into effectiveness rates because I can't explain it as well as Matt can, but basically that would be the recommendation for a 2 mil levy would be to bond 85 million of it and use the rest pay as you go. And then for the 3 mills, which would yield a total of 225 million in bond revenue, in total revenue, the staff recommendation would be something along the lines of 125 million bonded, and the rest pay as you go. And what that means, if you break out the handy little chart that Mac was kind enough to provide to explain it to, I asked him to explain this to me like I'm in the third grade, and that's exactly what he did. So I can certainly appreciate that. But these different pages here shows the difference between, I think the first one is 1 and 2 mills. The rest should be 2 and 3 mills. But it breaks down how the income would come in. And I think what you're looking at is that second to last column where total expenses, that would be the annual money that would be available for projects. So on the second page, you start off with 25 million in the first 2 years, going up to 34, then dropping down to 13 million a year. And so that you're looking at the second to last column on each page to look at the total dollars that would be available for projects. And those are the different scenarios. We'll put this in a more presentable format when we send it out to you guys, so it's a little easier to read. But I wanted this information to be available for the discussion.
Okay. Do we have any questions for Mr. Davis?
Probably.
So I'll jump in. You mentioned the full bonding capacity and then the recommended bonding dollar amount. Is that what we need to also consider is the what the recommended bonding dollar
No,
amount?
I think because that language would not be in the referendum language. We would probably look at, we would have the ability to bond through the referendum. And then as projects started to come together, as we got a lay of the landscape, that sort of thing, we would work with Mac's team to figure out what our actually, because we have to also consider how quickly we can get money out the door, which if $25 million landed in our lap right now, we would have a very difficult time spending that money. But hopefully by the time the referendum passes and by the time money starts coming in, we're looking at 2 years. We hope that we will have that kind of pipeline where, we can start funding. But we definitely want to make sure that we're able to get the money out of the door in time. So we'll look at, I would imagine that by the referendum time, we will have some idea. And then maybe a year after the referendum, we would have an actual plan as to how that dollar amount would be bonded and spent.
Thank you. Duncan, did I see you? No. Oh, okay. Okay. All right. Well, now we need to discuss, we've had the presentation from Justin and Miriam. We've had the recap. Now our conversation, the work that we need to do is decide, where do we want to land as a committee? The staff and the council may end up settling on 2, but my opinion is we've had a very compelling case made for the need. I think we can discuss any potential scenarios, and I'd like to go around the dais and get everyone's opinion on your current opinion of where we are and where we should likely head as a recommendation. Ms. Hunter, would you like to start us off?
Okay. I'm sorry, I was trying to get her to get it up. I didn't realize the language is already up there.
Oh, okay. And this was the 2020 language that's on, okay. So the things that we can consider here are what amount in the form of a mill that we'd like to recommend. One of the items that's been brought up several times in previous meetings and was a big question during 2020 was the lack of detail and specificity on who this question 1 would benefit. Mr. Porter in one of our meetings highlighted the Santa Cruz language where they go through the potentially impacted communities. These are all things that we can consider in our recommendation that would be sent on to first legal and then council for their ultimate decision. But we just need to determine, how much detail, what type of detail, and how we can help direct that recommendation to council. Go ahead, Mr. Cheney.
Thanks, Chairman. I have the language in front of me that was sent out in the email. I'm not sure it's up right now, but it's this sample language that you described as that it's open for discussion. I think it's a good place to start for sure. I like the language about adding people to this because this is at the end of the day who this really affects. I think the sentence after that, it talks about what 3 mills equals, which is helpful information. I think it needs to maybe add language about how long. I'm just reading it again to make sure it's not in here somewhere. But how long is this in effect for? I think question 2 probably does.
Okay.
But it just says generate roughly $12 million a year for our housing needs. It's my understanding this would be over a period of time, $12 million a year per 20 years, or depending on it, how it's bonded. I don't know if that's necessary to include, but if I was an uneducated voter, I might just think that that's just a one-time thing. But this is not a one-time.
What it generates is annual, right?
But for how long of a period? Right. That's what I'm speaking to. So we just need to add that. I think it might be addressed in question 2. It says 20 years. But adding that piece.
Okay.
The little minor edit recommendation as well. The first sentence says fund the county housing plan, and then the second sentence says finance housing initiatives. I think we should just have consistency and just the word fund is broad enough. I think it would encumber all of the activities. And I understand these tools need to be as broad as possible under the restrictions that are out there. So, but overall, very pleased with this starting point. And I think you asked, but also I'll say it. I do support the $3 million increase. I think with the $62 million annual need that our consultants have presented, $12 million a year makes a dent, but it isn't quite what we need. I think it was mentioned by Mr. Davis about exploring other funding options as well. I encourage that to happen so it doesn't affect tax holders, property taxpayers. But I'll just conclude my comments. I think this is a great place to start.
Thank you, Mr. Cheney. Ms. Jackson.
I support the 3 million, and I do hope that the finance office and the council who will be listening to them, can appreciate the need and the documentation that has backed that conclusion of need. So I'm glad to hear that Mr. Davis is thinking down the road. There should be some other sources of public funding that can come in and supplement what we would be creating with this referendum as sort of the backbone for how to finance the need. But I would really like to see the council be as educated as possible on how we got to the 3 million. I mean, we could justify a lot more than that, right? But we know that that's reaching too far. So I think 3 is a good place to land, and I think we should deliver that as emphatically and strongly as we can. I also like the way that the word structure is shining a light on the beneficiaries of the need, the reasons that we're creating housing funding opportunities for the people that we all want to be comfortable, able to live in Charleston County as opposed to having to commute or not even take a job here because they just literally can't afford the overall cost. So listing and itemizing the career categories that you have here, as well as seniors, people with disabilities, and other vulnerable communities. I think that's the right message for us to deliver for people's consideration. I think we should make it clear that it's $12 million annually for up to a 20-year period, and that in that same sentence it just says for our housing needs. I would insert the word our citizens' housing needs. We need to drive that home, that we're not doing this just to feather any nests in the county other than the people that can't afford to live here. So, and the $40,000 a unit is not going to be feathering anybody's recipient nest either. So I think we, as we deliver the report and begin to make that clear that the county is going to be expecting to leverage other ways of creating and preserving housing, that we're certainly not going to become a monolithic builder of housing. We're going to be using all of the stakeholders and the tools that exist.
Thank you. Ms. Woodward.
Good afternoon. I also agree with the $3 million, and my reasoning is that as we see the increase and inflation happens, by the time this money is ready to get out there, we're going to need more than that, but I think that we should ask for the maximum rather than the minimum. I appreciate what the staff has come up with. I can even understand it. So, and secondly, this is really minute. When in the language, as we identify the recipients, and I was reading that, the first thing that came to mind was I think there's a segment of our community that during the pandemic, we saw exactly their need, our need, and that was the hospitality community. I think that being inserted there will bring a little more emphasis on who really needs housing. If you go back and, I know in Mount Pleasant, I know in the city of Charleston, I know in the city of North Charleston, there's such a need for our hospitality employees to be able to live in the community that they work in. And they have been I know a few years ago, very vocal about that need. So that's my comments.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Dukes?
I just kind of want to echo what everyone said before. I'm in favor of us asking for the $3 million, to the points Ms. Woodward made, that you should ask for the most, with the expectation that costs are currently going to keep going up due to inflation and other supply chain issues, and that we should really try to hammer home the point of who's benefiting from the affordable housing that we could develop here.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Hunter?
I'm going to echo both of those statements for the $3 million, but also that identifying, people want to make sure that they're seen in this conversation and that they can identify with how this is going to benefit them. And the hospitality industry is definitely a key one here in Charleston. I know that in our 2020 referendum, we had several restaurant owners reach out. So that is something that I want to make sure that we also include in this language as well.
Thank you. Ms. Boley?
Mr. Davis, is there more information about the staff's concerns of the $3 million versus the $2 million when they recommended $2 million?
Okay, well, first, there's been no recommendation yet. I just wanted to give you guys a heads up in case it came out differently, but it's basically a conversation between us and the numbers that are down here, between Mac Giles' office and what they're seeing in terms of how close we are to the millage cap, and that sort of thing. So I'm still learning about this, so I definitely don't want to step out there and say these are specific concerns, but I will Just like he put this together, I will ask him to see if he can articulate what his concerns are, put those together with our concerns, and lay it out that way.
Thank you.
What is the millage
Yeah,
cap?
that was going to be my question. The millage cap.
Don't
yeah.
get me lying on the
Okay.
record. I will provide that to you, though, very soon.
One follow-up question, I guess. When you say staff, it can be helpful to just know what staff is, what you're referring to when you say staff.
Sure. Staff is a combination of our office, the DCA's office, DCA Durant, and even including the county administrator, Bill Tootin. So we are all considered staff. There will be a conversation. There will be some discussion, and there are well, I guess I haven't been through that process too many times, so don't want to give too many details, but staff includes all of those.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Could I just make, I forgot to look at my second paragraph, the bonding explanation, and again, going back to, the vote in 2020, I think that people don't understand what bonding is, for one thing, and having that big number in front of them. So if we're not going to, try to bond more than 85,000 or whatever the equivalent is under the 3 mil, it's whatever that is. Yeah. No, it was 125. So I think we should match it to what, the millage that we're recommending, but more importantly, try to explain with, some other words that as I was reading that paragraph, it just occurred to me that we can say that the bonds will mature over a period not to exceed 20 years to more timely fund initiatives, because if they're being asked, they're being told that the millage increase that is paid annually is going to generate 12 million, then where does the 130 million come from? And I think that just saying more timely at least helps to target the fact that you use the 12 million annually to pay the debt service on a bond issuance. And then another little couple of words I put in, to fund initiatives for known housing needs as described in question 1 above, so that we're not just, again, asking them to think about these as two different pots of money. It's one decision that the voter is being asked to make, but it's just how the money is going to be used and where is it going to be the source for timely delivery, for use to meet needs that we know we have now, compared to watching these needs accumulate over time.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
I got a couple here if she's
Yes, sir.
not ready. Actually, that's a very good point, is to make it clear that we're talking about the same money, as opposed to, asking for two pots of money. I think that's a very important distinction. I will say I would be opposed to including I would be opposed to including professions in the language. I don't know if that's legally, I don't know what legal's going to think about that, but I can imagine that, as projects are coming out of the ground, folks are coming to our office saying this money was supposed to be for firefighters. And there are no firefighters in the building or what have you. So just from I would be very concerned about language identifying specific people. Also, I think one of the things we discussed earlier that I think would be critically important is to make it clear that, and I think it's important for this body as well as our office, to make it clear that the money is to fund the plan. Because if that's not in there, there will be a lot of temptation to do these other things that aren't in the plan. What we identify in that plan, and if this body if this body turns into, a permanent body, I think you would probably want to make sure that, because the plan would be amended based on a vote, based on, an actual work, as opposed to somebody coming in from the outside and saying, well, let's do 10 million for this other thing over here.
Yeah, that's a
so
good point.
it's very important to staff that the language specify that it is to fund the plan.
So you're going to name the plan, basically.
Yes.
Well, I can see that, there could be some legal hurdle to actually naming the individual professions. I mean, basically, we're categorizing those, I'm assuming, if Josh wrote this or whoever drafted it, into income earning ranges. So somehow we can make that clear, I would hope, that this housing will be based on our eligibility criteria. It'll be eligible to people in these types of professions based on the incomes that we know they earn, which I know is, it's getting more people into the weeds, but I do think that helping them use their imagination for who earns what, and who do we desire to make, for our county housing to be accessible, I think somehow we've got to equate those two and make it as legal as it needs to be.
Ms. Bowley?
So I agree with Carol as far as making sure that the people who are voting understand who these funds will benefit and who the plan benefits. But as you said, Mr. Davis, I actually was going to say the reverse, which is that if you say, for example, the hospitality industry, and you have firefighters who would qualify, then, the hospitality people can say, I'm sorry, that's not for you, it's for the hospitality folks. In other words, if you can't name every single group that it's going to benefit, I don't think that you can name any, just from the legal side of it. But our job and the job of staff, I think, will be to have all of those different professions and their income ranges on a flyer, on a handout that we talk about in the public, so that when anyone hears about the plan, they're going to know already who that benefits. I mean, I've always been surprised that first-year teachers and first responders qualify for Habitat homes. Right. So, I mean, it's very near and dear to me who we're benefiting when we're doing this work. Yeah, I think that's it.
Thank you. Ms. Hunter?
Well, maybe we should turn the 120% of area median income into a number.
We can certainly do that.
Well, that changes every year, though. I think to follow best practice, I think
We're starting out now.
I don't know. I think there's enough, in my opinion, there's enough outs for us here. It says not limited to, add hospitality. I think that's a great recommendation. And then it says other vulnerable communities, and we can add in other vulnerable communities and eligible households. I mean, I think the issue with the last ballot was that there wasn't enough, details and plans, and there might be voters who we won't access in this next round as well. Maybe they don't get the information that Mr. Davis's office is going to work so hard to get them, and so this might be the only thing they see. And who can vote no to teachers and firefighters? Well, there certainly are people who do that regularly, but we hope that's not the majority. So I recommend trying to find a way that the legal folks on staff can keep some of this language, because I do feel like it is going to help us get a win. People vote with their emotions, and I think we have to keep that in mind.
Would another way? I'm sorry, jump the line.
I'm going to go Ms. Hunter first, and I'll come back to you.
I'm going to stand with Duncan and say I think that representation matters. I think people need to know when we get to this ballot what they're voting for. They need to understand it. And our community portion, where we're going out and advocating for this, we are going to have to make sure that we are giving clear definitions to some of this language that we're comfortable with and that we see every day. But the average Charleston County citizen does not. So AMI, levy, I think we're going to have to do an outstanding job with community engagement when it comes to making sure that our community understands the language on this ballot.
Thank you. Mr. Dukes?
I really was just echoing Duncan and Shauna's points about how we could best explain it, where we talking about hospitality folks and other people is like public servants or public service areas like teachers, firemen, police officers. I think there's a way we can word it to and capture all those folks.
Okay. I'm sorry. Oh, Ms. Woodward. Thank you.
Of course, I will go along with the majority. And the reason why I think that we should identify some of the beneficiaries is because in our community, as I've been working in the housing field, that's what people have heard over and over again. There is housing need for police officers, and that's a lot of support when you say police officers, teachers, firefighters. That seems to get the attention of the public. And so I will stick with my idea, but I will vote for whatever the group as a whole say that we need to do.
Well, I think Mr. Davis's point is that it might be not in our control. So hopefully the people who deliver this to the legal team or whoever's going to make the final call on language, will communicate clearly our sentiment about how important it is to make this known to people in some way that they can grab onto it, with their own understanding and their own life experiences.
And I think that's the two main points here. This is a recommendation from us. It is beyond our control what end up making it to the ballot or what council decides. But the thing that we can control is what we recommend to the council. So I think we have to separate the two. We can let council and legal and staff worry about weeding it down. We need to make the strongest recommendation possible to council, so at least they have the ammunition to, position themselves in a good place. If they want to weed it down, that is their discretion. Our objective here is to make sure that they have the information that they need in order to make the best decision that they possibly can. So I don't believe any of the conversations or comments that have been raised are out of bounds. Ultimately, these are going to be decisions made by people beyond our control. So we'll continue this this question. Mr. Davis?
So to be clear, what legal is expecting from this body is a statement of the goals, what you expect to accomplish, and then they will write the language from scratch. So what I would probably recommend, I'm listening to everyone's concerns, what I would probably recommend is to simply do that and then attach some of the other, some of the concerns that were discussed here in terms of, the naming of the professions and all that kind of stuff as an attachment. But to keep it clear, because what I don't want is for when this goes into the government machine, that the wrong things get chopped up. So I would like to keep it very clear that here's the goal, and then here's some things that, maybe we would like to see in the language, or that we think, would be appropriate, or what have you. But the goal should be stated clearly by itself, because I don't want to risk that being chopped up. And that's what they're expecting to get from this committee.
Okay. I'm going to go Ms. Woodward, then I'll come back to you.
Okay. I don't want to see these languages get so long, then when it get on the ballot, nobody's going to really read it. I would prefer, I'm still sticking with naming beneficiary, but as Shonda has said, that people will understand what levy is, what the bond is. I think that language is most important for people that don't see this type of language on an everyday basis or know a lot about that. And maybe that was one of, I don't know, but I'm assuming maybe that was one of the things that why it failed before, because of a lack of understanding the language. So, number one, we don't want it too long, but number two, we want it to the point where the citizens that's going to read this will actually understand what they're reading.
Ms. Hunter?
Correct. Of course, I second that, but also, so you want us to submit to council basically statements of what we want to ensure is in there, but are we also submitting sample ballot language to them as well?
Okay, we're not submitting ballot language. I can tell you that much. And I think what is expected from this body, like I said, is the goals. This is what we want to do. We want a 3 mil tax, to fund the plan, essentially. The other, I guess, I'm really concerned about all the other language getting put into that conversation at all, because I believe it goes outside the scope of what we're expected to do here, and it has the potential of creating confusion when folks are determining what's actually going to be on that language with council. I'm not in that room when the council people are discussing things or what have you, and I think you run a risk by having extra information go into that room without representation from anybody here. That is my primary concern, and I guess that's as far as I can go. I don't know if do you want to?
Yeah, let me try.
Okay.
I think the separation between what you all will do individually to educate the public as part of your community engagement is separate and apart from what our legal department has to write to meet the state test for referendum ballot language. So trying to merge those together, you could very well get very much the same language that's right here because it has to meet the state, whatever that law is as to how they're writing it. So I'm thinking that if you can separate what you all will do as individuals, because remember, you cannot try to lobby as a body because you're an extension of county council. So individually, you will be working this as individuals in your capacity. So in speaking to our lead county attorney, the goal is exactly what I will be providing to her. It won't go to council. It will go to her and her legal staff that will then write the ballot language that council will either choose to adopt or not. So to distinguish what you all would do with community engagement and education and what ballot language has to say. Does that separate those topics a little bit for what you all are needing to do?
Mr. Chairman. I mean, I'm sorry. Yes, it makes it very clear. I think we've always been clear, Mr. Ant, in terms of, there is a legal standard that every referendum question on an official ballot has to meet. But basically, the goal is to create a set of requests to the voting public that earns their positive vote, right? Otherwise, why are we here?
It's not, actually. So that's the key point of the ballot language, is it can't be designed to influence a vote. So keep in mind, that's the standard, that the ballot language, it is neutral. It is simply fact-based. And that's why I'm trying to distinguish the ballot language. And if we get too far into legal, I'm going to say, Mark, I need your legal brain. But that is the whole point, is it cannot be designed to influence. That would be a violation of
I think
the
it's
state.
explaining. It's not influencing. It's stating the purpose for asking taxpayers to agree that they're going to pay, less than $100 a year increase in taxes for the average homeowner, and they need to know why. And so that's what we're trying to accomplish with the ballot language, because yes, we're going to go out and trying to, encourage our own individual circles of influence that this is a good thing to do. But we're not going to be in front of how many ever thousands and thousands of voters there are on November 8th or whenever Election Day is. So I understand. I think we're all grown-ups. We all understand where you're coming from. We're not trying to beat you up. But I somehow we've got to be able to communicate that to the legal team that inside the letter of the law, we still need to get the public to understand why this is even in front of them. That's not influencing them, that's explaining the need. Those are facts.
I hear you. I'm telling you, I want you all to be informed so that you aren't led to believe it'll be something different than it is. I'm going to tell you the full story of how and what the end result could be so that you are making an informed decision as to what your recommendation is.
May I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
Who wrote this language that has identified these?
I wrote the test language.
Okay. Okay. All right.
He wrote the one.
I
we
wrote
liked.
it to lead discussion.
Okay.
I pulled it from other ballot language to try to give a concept of what it could potentially look like, what it's looked like in other markets. But I didn't consult with the county attorney. This was something that I did just to help lead discussion.
Okay. I just wanted to know that where the origin of the language came from, because I would have, in my mind's view, I'm thinking that this was given to us with the staff's blessing, or the staff has reviewed this, or maybe said to you, maybe we need to change this before we take it to the body.
The truth is, we have no say in the matter. Once it goes to legal, it doesn't come back to us for review. So
I understand that. I meant, when I said the body, I meant bringing it to the board, the steering committee. Maybe some of this could have been ironed out if there was a view of it before it was presented to the committee. Because I got really confused when you're talking about, this is probably not the right language. So if it's not the right language, why is this language being brought before this committee? This has caused some conversations that we probably could have avoided. That's all. No criticism, just wanted to know the origin.
Mr. Riley, did you have? Okay.
Really
Ms. Hunter?
quickly, since we have legal and Ms. Christine here in the building, have you all had a chance to look at this draft ballot language?
I have not seen anything that you guys are reviewing at the moment. The only thing I have seen is the 2020 referendum question.
Okay.
What's that?
So is our goal to just agree that we want to put the 3 mil forward? That's what our purview is?
That is the overall goal, and then we can, I've been taking everyone's thoughts and notes here with what the recommendation would be along with the intended goal of the mill request. So.
Okay. Do you need a motion, or you've already gone around the table? You don't have
Yeah,
Mr.
before we do
Riley's-
that, I just want to make sure that I have everyone's thoughts written down. So for question 1, and this is in the order that I wrote them down, not any other order, we would like the length, duration of the bond, the 20 years, to be explicitly written. Have this referred to as funding the housing plan. We would recommend the listed impacted communities. The millage breakdown that was supplied homeowner versus commercial per $100,000 of value. What the citizen housing needs are, the 12 million per year per 20 years, highlighting the hospitality community as one of the career categories, and to simplify the language with regards to levy and some of the more technical terms. For question 2, match the commitment or actual capacity of what we're willing to bond, and the fund initiative as known housing needs as identified in question 1, to kind of connect question 1 and question 2 to the voter.
Or you can say the housing plan if you're going to reference that
Right.
in the top.
Okay.
And the reason for the bond is to get the money now,
Yes, ma'am.
as opposed to, so somehow to communicate that.
Okay. Okay.
So, Josh, just so
Yes,
I'm
ma'am.
clear, the goal that we are going to present is the 3 mil levy to fund the housing plan.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And the rest of this stuff is just, here's some suggestions for things that we talked about that we would like to be included if that's legally possible.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And then we will send, along with this mill request, the housing needs assessment that Justin and Miriam compiled for us, so that council has some justification of what we're asking for and what the actual need out in the market is.
Good.
So,
Those are two different things though, right? First it goes to legal, legal drafts the document, and then the drafted document, we don't see it again, but the drafted document and the supplemental materials we present to council, or that gets presented to council, not by us.
it will be presented to council, yes, ma'am.
I got it, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Any other?
One clarification to what I believe Ms. Valley's statement was, is the end of that would be, and the ability to bond. I don't know if you mentioned the bond.
I did not, but yes,
Okay.
and the ability to bond.
And the ability to
For
bond, but what she said, I
recommendation.
think, sounds like a pretty good motion to me.
Okay.
Okay.
3 mills to fund the housing plan, along with the ability to bond.
Right, and then the additional language that we would like included if it's legally feasible.
Okay, so let me make sure I have your motion correct. You're recommending the 3 mil recommendation with the housing needs assessment and the capacity to bond. We will also provide the recommendations that we would like entertained as far as ballot language is considered.
If the housing needs assessment is what you're calling the housing plan,
Yeah, I think we should call it the housing plan.
Okay,
because it's really not just the needs assessment, it's more than that.
okay.
Do you want me to restate it again?
Let me make sure I have it. So the motion is a 3 mil request accompanied by the housing, our future plan,
To fund.
to fund the housing,
housing
our
plan.
future plan, and the bonding capacity. Correct? Okay. And then we will also send a list of recommendations that we would like to see included.
If legally possible, yes.
Okay. Motion has been stated. Can I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion on the motion on the floor? Mr. Riley?
This is probably a little extraneous, and I apologize for my absence. When you vote, the way that you're seeing this language is up and down on a screen, to your point. What looks like not that many words on here is a ton when you're going to vote. And there's a certain point where you just, if it's confusing, you don't read it. And if it's too long, you don't read it. And I know the point was made earlier. I just think we are making language recommendations for the legal staff, but I just think if this thing isn't simple enough, that might be our biggest risk.
Yeah, it's tough.
Keep it simple.
So, can I ask Bratton a question?
Yes, ma'am.
Bratton, what you came into the conversation a little late. What are your thoughts on identifying the recipients of this housing? So here we in this draft, and we can't use this draft, but
Right.
hypothetically, saying the AMI, which will include but not limited to teachers, service employees, et cetera. We were talking about the hospitality industry and things like that. I just wanted your input, being that you're a part of the committee.
I just, it's like, this is from historical experience. These things pass, the more specific they are. People know this is where my money's going to. I just think you have to balance that by running the risk that we're making it too complicated with too many words. It's like, well, we mentioned the hospitality industry and the public, law enforcement industry, but we're not mentioning the teachers or it's like, well, why is it my group in here? So I just think we have to be careful about that. I'm not giving you definitive answers, but I just think we have to be careful with people poking holes in the language, and the more language that's provided, the more opportunities for holes to be poked. But it has to be specific.
I mean, would we say that what was on the ballot in 2020 was the ideal for simplicity and brevity and clarity?
I mean, I'm looking at it, I think it's too long, personally.
As someone who went and did the campaign, I can tell you the 2020 language was not direct or specific enough.
Okay.
We got torn apart because we didn't say who would benefit. We didn't say what the impact was going to be per your house. I understand we can't get too wordy, but you can also run the risk of being too brief. And so, again, that is going to be a question that legal and counsel has to determine. I can just tell you the 2020 language was too short. So,
And the follow up on that, I agree. I think that we got really torn apart. I mean, just look at the word "or." That one word was very problematic, because then the question is not about who's this fund going to help. It's about, well, who's going to run it? Is operate, and then that became the narrative, and we didn't have an answer for that. That was across the board, and so I feel like providing the professions here and adding some and thinking very intentionally about who we might miss is important, because then that becomes the narrative. It's not about, and again, this is about educating folks, not influencing them, but it really is about educating about who needs housing. And I think the housing plan, as we see it today, and the framework, it is providing how these monies are going to be allocated. And I have confidence in the direction the consultant and staff is moving. And so, if we look at the ballot measure that passed last round from the school district, I mean, that was a whole page, and it did list every project, and it beat that housing referendum by a big margin. We don't have the luxury to name specific projects, but we can name people, and that I think we should definitely explore a way to do that.
Can I just ask a question about that?
yes, sir.
Just about the education. I appreciate the point. Like, did they list all the
Every project, every school, everything that's going to be rebuilt or improved.
Yeah, and that's a great point. It's like hit them all, right? And I want to be very clear. I want to defer to the experience and the judgment of you all that have been down this path before. So I'm not trying to create more issues than there are. I very much respect the guidance of that. And I would just caution us all, and y'all are in it, Duncan, and when we say like, well, people, we got people were beating us down for this, that, and the other, just making sure that it wasn't like one or two people that were loud about it, but like it was like a real thing. Y'all know the answer to that. I don't. So,
Would like to add one
Davis.
little thing here. So actually, I think you guys made a couple points that will help me clarify what I believe Ms. Durant was trying to get to. You talked about this referendum, whatever you're talking about, listed every school. And it would be different if we could list every profession, because you're listing every school to say these are all the schools that your money is going to go to. We can't do that here. And I think where we're getting at all boils down to this. What you're all talking about is voter education. It may not be balloteering, it's voter education. But my understanding is voter education is not a part of what's going to go on the ballot. And I think a good example would be if you're talking about individual candidates and you say, do you support this candidate who supports abortion and this candidate who's against abortion? That language would never go on a ballot because that is voter education, and the ballot language isn't going to educate voters. That's our job. And I think that's what Ms. Durant was getting at. That's the last, I mean, you guys can, continue to discuss it, but I think that was a perfect opportunity to clarify what I think she was trying to say is that the language is not intended to educate. That's our job.
Yeah, except that it's not going to be a job that we can do in any sort of, institutional entity type way. I mean, individuals. So I understand the law is the law, and we're not going to buck the law, but it definitely feels like we're shooting ourselves in the foot, just all over again in an environment now of an economy that we haven't seen in 10 years, and if that continues on, in terms of people's concerns about their pocketbook, then this is probably all for naught anyway. So it feels a little discouraging right now. I'm assuming that we're going to get short, Mr. Riley, because the legal team are going to write the ballot language. So.
Let me address that real quick, Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind.
Yes, sir.
We do run the risk of. I think it does kind of. I mean, I face that every day, dealing with. I come here to do a job and to do these things, and then there's the county process or any government process. So I totally get that, but I also want to remind this group that this is a milestone today. When I got here in November, this was one of the milestones we carved out, was that this committee would be created and that we would send a recommendation to council. So don't get discouraged because we're having this back and forth about legalities and all that. That process is never going to go away. And what I encourage my staff every single day, you can't let the process beat you down. So I want all of you to just remember this is a milestone. We have been working towards this date for a very long time, that this committee would, number one, be formed. And if I could only tell you what went into forming this committee. And now we are at the point where we are sending that recommendation to council. So, please don't let the process discourage you. This is what we've got to work through, and we've got so much more to work through. So regardless the back and forth that goes on, I think we've done a tremendous job to get here, and I don't want anybody to forget that.
Okay, I know I'm the one who's whining right now, and I apologize for that, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Davis and Ms. Durant. I guess in listening to you again right now, Mr. Davis, it's like, why is it forbidden to the steering committee to be part of the citizen education as a steering committee? If that's what our mission is from the county council, we're supposed to put a plan together that we can all believe in because we've seen the foundations for why we need this plan and what the plan is going to accomplish. Why would then we be prohibited from introducing it to the citizens that need to believe in this plan with us in order to support any sort of funding, whether it comes from a referendum ballot or just, reading about it in the paper on supporting a project in their community. I don't think I understand that disconnect.
So I think, and I hope somebody will jump in and correct me if I'm wrong here, but the job of this committee, in my understanding, is to inform council, to do the brain work of council, essentially. That's it. But you are here because of your knowledge, because of your passion, because of the work that you have done. And that is the entity that we expect to go out in the community and do those things. So the fact that there's no official government name behind, and again, as county employees, we can't, now imagine that I get up every morning with the sole purpose of completing this plan, and I can't go out there and sell it. I can't go out there and sell it as it relates to the ballot. But I am constantly in my official capacity saying, this is the plan. This is the plan we need to go for. Now, when it comes to funding that plan, I'm not allowed to encourage people to vote for or against the referendum. So those are just the rules that I operate in. So the job of the body is to inform council and to be council's brain. But you are here because of your expertise, because of your passion, because of your knowledge. And that is what we are expecting will go out into the community and do what needs to be done. Because trust me, being a member of this committee will carry its own weight, in my opinion. It really will.
All right, well, I'll take this conversation offline. I really don't understand the distinction between representing council, but yet not being able to speak on behalf of the work that they tasked us to do. I'm not talking about selling it as a vote, as a yes vote for the ballot. I'm talking about educating the community about a plan that 2 years ago didn't exist. And that was, a big challenge for the council and the county to put a referendum on the ballot without a specific plan. Now we're going to have a specific plan. Aren't we going to be involved in delivering that plan to the public?
Yes. I think the only thing here is about the referendum itself, the vote. That's the only thing we're worried about.
All right,
So yes,
well, good.
you will be.
I'm glad I've harangued you to get
Okay.
to that understanding then, because I think that's a big distinction.
Okay. So all of this is in reference to the ballot, not the plan.
Okay.
Okay. We've had a healthy discussion. We have a motion on the floor that is to recommend 3 mills to council with the question 2, which allows for bonding capacity, and then a set of recommendations that we would like to see included if allowed by legal and council. We have a motion and a second. May I call for a vote?
Mr. Dix, can you just please say when we're recommending 3 mills to fund the housing?
The housing plan.
Housing Our Future plan?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Mr. Cheney.
One last comment. Is there any way we can see that language before it goes to council, even if our vote doesn't matter at this point? It seems like it won't. I just feel like we're voting on a goal. Legal's going to write it. And then, and I know time's not on our side, but it just seems like the process to honor the, volunteered commitment we have on this body to at least have a look at it. It would make me feel more comfortable to at least get a glance at it before it's voted on, and to provide some kind of feedback, or at least questioning on how it came about. It seems like this committee. I mean, what's the point of the committee if staff's going to just write it anyways?
We can certainly make that request. I'm not sure that request would be granted, but we can make that a part of not a part of this motion, but we can make that request. Happy to do so.
Sure. Wasn't asking to be part of the motion, but just as a courtesy.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yes, sir. All right.
All right. All the questions.
Call for a vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Ayes have it. Upcoming meetings. This was the big one that we had to get over this hurdle. From here on out, it's going to be formulating the plan, At our next meeting, we will cover the framework, begin sending that in pieces to council so that they can start to digest not only this mill request that we've asked, but also what this plan entails. So we have the July meeting to look at the framework and get that organized and put together. August, we'll try to put a little more meat on the bones for that framework. September, as was laid out by the consultants, we'll be doing the charrettes and finalizing the last bit of detail for the October publishing of the draft report. Then we'll move into the election and hopefully have a plan for the rest of the year as far as putting this plan into place, how the committee needs to move going forward. But that will be the schedule for the rest of the year, unless there are any questions or concerns about the workload going forward. Mr. Dukes?
No.
Mr. Cheney?
And my only comment is that it just seems with the recent vote last night that we need to try to expedite the presentation of this plan. I see that in the timeline that our consultant presented that September, October were for public meetings, and a draft plan would be out in October. If it's possible any way to expedite that, I think it'd only be beneficial to this whole effort, not just the vote, but just public confidence. And feel like the staff and consultants moving in the right direction. That's just my recommendation.
Yeah, I think, let me clarify here. I think what you will, the 20 million they set aside was from ARPA. So the first thing you will see is a draft, probably of a recommendation from our office as to what happens with that 20 million. So that will not wait on the plan. We want it to align with the plan. So we're going to try to move slowly enough so the plan can come together. But you'll see a recommendation for that 20 million fairly soon. And yeah, fairly soon.
Okay. Is that okay? All right. We're going to do final comments. Mr. Dukes, do you want to start us off?
I'm happy to. Sorry, Mike. I felt the day was productive, and we had a good discussion about what we can put into the ballot, and trying to make sure that we're as inclusive as possible, so we can drive home the point of what people are voting for, so they can understand it better.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Riley. Ms. Woodward.
I'm going to always say something. I really appreciate the discussion, and I think on a line with Mr. Davis, we should know that everybody is not going to agree, and so we need to just be able to agree to agree on whatever our ideas are, and then come up with whatever the solution should be. I'm in it for the long haul. You guys don't know how long I wanted this to happen.
Mr. Cheney.
No comment, thanks.
Ms. Boley. No. Ms. Jackson.
No, I have a question of Mr. Davis, as long as you've got a couple more minutes. So the 20 million that was approved last night by County Council from ARPA funding, is that the 20 million that you've been talking about for? So, or is that a second 20 million?
No, okay. How do I say this? I don't believe I've spoken about a 20 million in public. I know that folks who have asked me about our plans for ARPA, I have mentioned that.
Okay.
And yes, that would be the same.
Okay, darn. Okay, thanks.
Just want to say thank you to everyone for their comments today. I think that this was a really good discussion. Thank you to staff for putting all this together for us. I think it was a good meeting.
And I want to thank everyone. That's the point of these meetings, is healthy debate, discussion. We have the opportunity to sit here for 2 hours and vet these ideas and these concepts. Council isn't afforded this luxury. So, this was a big step. I've been through a lot of these fights and debates over the last 3 years, and we are moving in the right direction. We're going to have more fights and debates before we get to November, and we'll have more fights and debates after November. But this committee is doing good work. We have a good plan heading into the election. I feel confident that this is going to happen. We'll make a big difference in a lot of people's lives. And I look forward to continuing this work and appreciate everyone's effort. So we will adjourn this meeting unless there's any other comments or concerns. Hearing none. It's 3:42. We'll call this meeting adjourned.
Thanks, Chairman.